Welcome to today's episode of Future Stack, where I'm joined by not one, but two extraordinary leaders in the tech industry. First, we have Martin Kelly, a cloud transformation, infrastructure, and security architect with over 20 years of experience, and a decade of which, with AWS, Martin is a master of DevOps, FinOps, and policy as code, especially in highly regulated environments. Currently serving as lead architect and senior customer engineer at Pythian, Martin has worked with some of the world's top organizations to build secure, scalable, and innovative solutions. Now, joining him is Warner Chavez, a multi-cloud solutions architect, Microsoft MVP, and international speaker, and host of the Datascape podcast. With over 16 years here at Pythian, Warner has led countless groundbreaking projects in data architecture and AI, earning certifications like SQL Server Certified Master and Snowflake Certified Architect. He's also a prolific author, community leader, sharing his expertise on platforms like, Pluralsight and through global tech events. Together, Martin and Warner bring decades of combined experience in cloud architecture, security, data platforms, and AI. And I'm excited to have them with me here today. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. So glad that you're here.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you, Jeff.
You bet. All right. So a fancy title. I feel like I'm in the presence of some folks who have done some big things here in the tech world.
I don't know that that's true. I always feel when I'm being introduced on these things that they must be talking about somebody else. I'm still essentially the same engineer that I was 20 years ago, just having seen more failure since then.
Well, and you and I had a conversation the other day. A group of us were on a call, and you were talking about the value of failures. First, there was some concern, and they were like, hey, failure can be a bad thing. Why don't you make the point you made the other day about the value of failures?
So I'd like to call it, like, the best thing you can do in your career is just run towards failure. You learn roughly 4 times as much about the platform that you're working on from a project gone wrong than you do from a project that went right the very first time. There's been some fairly good research about it, so I may be slightly over-egging the pudding on the value of it, but you can find out how not to do things much faster from a failure than you can from reading a book.
Very true, as long as you don't repeat the failures, right?
Well, that's the assumption, that you learn from the failure and put those learnings into practice. Not everybody does that, but that probably will be out with the scope of this podcast.
So critical part of the strategy.
Yeah. Don't
Exactly.
do the same thing expecting a different result.
Yeah, there's somebody had a phrase for that. I think it's called insanity. All right, so our goal here today is to talk about some of the trends and things that we've seen in 24, and then using our technology crystal ball, not AI, but our own guts, what's going to happen in 2025. Let's start with cloud trends in 2024. Warner, both of you have spent a ton of time in this space, but when we think about cloud computing, what did you see advance that in 2024 that really made a difference in this space?
To me, I've seen a couple of obvious trends. One is that the practices for going into the cloud are a lot more mature now, and most of the big hyperscalers all over have really well fleshed out, well architected frameworks. So for organizations like Pythian, for example, that we're used to doing this over and over, it really gives us a very strong blueprint to how to go to the cloud. So we see less and less people that are just going like next on portals, and more of people looking for the guidance to produce real virtual data centers in the cloud, following all these well-architected frameworks that all the hyperscalers are creating. So that's a really positive trend, right? Brings a lot more order and governance into all these initiatives. Another interesting trend, this is a counter trend actually, we can dive into it later, is that if you go on online circles, like a lot of the conversation on social media, like X, LinkedIn, even Reddit, there is certainly an interesting trend of people that are starting to doubt the cloud investment conversation and pushing for going on-prem instead, right? Very famously, the creator of Ruby on Rails is a DHH. I forget what his actual name is, but he's he's very popular on X, for example, and he boasts quite a bit on how he slashed his AWS bill by pretty much leaving AWS and hosting all of their products back on-prem. Right, so there is a counter trend definitely picking up where some organizations are saying, well, look, for our use case, for our scale, for what we're trying to do, the cloud just didn't turn out to be a good fit.
Yeah, the old repatriation conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to dig into that a little bit, so I'm familiar with that article as well, and I was chatting with a couple of colleagues about it. He's a great writer, but he often over eggs the pudding when he's making those cases. And what he didn't talk about in the savings was they were using hardware that they'd already purchased. So they already had a data center. So they had no hardware expenditure and no data center expenditure. And they used their own middleware layer to manage their on-prem workload. And the cost of developing that, which is a non-trivial cost, was completely absent from his calculation. And then the last one is, and this is not too distant, Basecamp is a great product, but their product portfolio is quite static. They've made a particular decision about the kind of business they want to be. They don't want ridiculous growth. They want to, give themselves a comfortable retirement. It's a lifestyle business, not a hyper growth business. So in those cases, I do agree that the case they made for their cloud repatriation was spot on, but I don't think it generalizes. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of talk about repatriation is it's the sort of the counterpoint to what Warner was saying. There is great structure, like the migration strategy for AWS and the onboarding strategy from Google are much better than they used to be. But within the sales structures, there's a countervailing trend where salespeople are incentivized, and partners to a degree are incentivized to get the workload onto cloud as fast as possible. So just doing a lift and shift rather than a rip and replace. And the rough rule of thumb is if you run your data center workload untransformed in the cloud, it's going to triple your bill. So I think that's leading into that sentiment that Warner's articulating about people have moved into the cloud and decided it wasn't for them and they now need to move out. If you don't take advantage of what's particular about the cloud and cost optimization, it's always going to be a bumpy ride.
That's right. And you bring up a really good point, Martin, and that is that a lot of people think about moving to the cloud as they would move from, managed hosting company X to managed hosting company Y, in that they're just going to lift and shift, they're going to rip and replace, they're going to do an infrastructure modernization and not do really an application modernization. And unless you adopt the cloud ethos, in other words, I'm going to move into the cloud and maybe lift and shift as part of the strategy, as long as that strategy continues down into a serverless environment, down into more of a PaaS environment, whatever it might be, but pulling those applications apart and utilizing, the native capabilities that are there, that's where the quote unquote cost savings are possible.
Yeah, I mean, and even if it's not necessarily cost savings, I mean, if you only get to cost parity or not too much, what you get is agility out of it. And you don't want to trade the agility for a tripled bill. And if you're doing a lift and shift, you're not getting any of the agility in.
Very true. Warner, you talk about the tools that now exist and the capabilities, the patterns for moving out into a cloud of choice. And really, what's your opinion then on our companies really following through with adopting the cloud, not just moving to the cloud?
Yeah, this is the struggle that Martin was just articulating too, right? With the whole lift and shift is a lot easier than proper cloud architecture, like you said, Jeff, moving into serverless architectures, using more of PaaS or even SaaS offerings, right, to be able to decrease your operation costs and so on. I feel like obviously partners and service providers like us, like Pythian, have a role to play there, try to educate the customers better, try to also be very realistic. Like Martin was saying, sometimes it's a battle of interests when we have to deal with the whole sales cycle as well, because obviously the hyperscalers also want to encourage consumption, right? So we have to find a good balance of where there is a return of investment for the customer, there's a good return on investment for the hyperscaler if they're also investing in the project itself. You got to really balance out all these different stakeholders, but at the end of the day, really, we want to do what's best for the customer, right? So most likely, at least in my opinion, I always try to make them take a look at, this is the right way to do things, not trying to sacrifice the quality for a deadline, trying to get them see the longer term picture, right? Not just the immediate, we're going to go to the cloud, and then that'll mean that we hit some kind of quarter goal that said we have to have this application in the cloud, that at the end of the day, it's going to come back in the next quarter and become an issue, right? When they realize, like Martin said, that maybe the bill has tripled because suddenly now they're just literally renting someone else's computer instead of owning the computer that they already had. So it is definitely a juggling act from my perspective. But I do, like I said at the beginning, I do feel like because of how much the hyperscalers themselves are pushing all this new material in terms of well-architected frameworks, in terms of cloud adoption frameworks, that the message is getting through a lot better than we would see, let's say back in like when I really saw the explosion, at least at Pythian, the explosion of cloud implementations was around 2016, I would say, maybe about 8 years ago. And it was a lot more just like, oh, let's just start moving VMs to the cloud, right? And that didn't go so well, obviously. And so I feel like that level of maturity is definitely there, where most projects are a lot more cloud native or cloud focused in their architecture than they used to be when we started to see this first big wave of cloud adoption.
And we're talking about this really in the aggregate. We're saying, hey, we're going to move to the cloud. We're going to repatriate from the cloud to our own data center, thinking we're taking the estate at large. I feel like I have observed organizations being more fit for purpose, application by application, and making that a wiser choice. What have you guys seen in that regard? Martin, we'll start with you.
Okay, so to that specific point, yeah, we're starting to see that over the last 18 months, 2 years, we're seeing a much more case-by-case evaluation of it. That's still driven by factors external to the IT architecture, like, we've got a lease on this much data center space, and sometimes that's a driver to push things out of a data center that might not be needed. But we've got clients who are taking multi-year approaches to getting their workloads, the workloads that are suitable into the cloud. And it's happening at a pace that the hyperscalers are seeing that trend and responding to it with technology releases that enable that as well. We can talk about that at a later phase. But yeah, I would agree. Much more like fit for purpose evaluation is coming into that decision. But then there's also still the changing financial landscape we're no longer in a zero interest rate environment. So the math around that. So it's like a three-body problem to agree. We've got financial constraints on finance on the loan side. We've got real estate constraints on the data center, and we've got technology, which is a moving target at the same time. So it's challenging, but I'm really encouraged by clients' willingness to take a bash at it.
Yeah. Werner, let me change the question just a little bit for you. How have you seen industry-specific clouds have an impact in a company's attitudes or actions in moving to the cloud? We think healthcare, we think FinServ. There are specific clouds now that even inside of the hyperscalers that are fit for purpose for those workloads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every single hyperscaler is trying to go into these fit-for-purpose environments or fit-for-purpose documentation. They have fit-for-purpose different versions of their offerings too. Like, for example, in Azure, you have the healthcare workloads in Fabric. I'll tell you that one. And that one was recently introduced as well. We have retail workloads as well that they're bringing in, right? Trying to make this slightly custom niche versions for these industries. What I find is that for the most part, this is kind of like an 80-20 kind of situation where you can't go all the way with whatever the hyperscaler has cooked for your industry, right? There's always a level of customization that they're not going to be able to reach to really represent your organization. So is it a good thing? I think so, because once again, it just gives you the blueprint, right? So you don't have to start from scratch, which is probably one of the hardest things for any organization, is to look at the blank canvas. But without a doubt, it's not something that you'll just pick off the shelf and deploy and just, you'll be happy with the solution. All of them require some level of customization from every single organization.
And we're having this conversation of, companies are looking at their bills largely and saying, should we repatriate out? Should we, make some changes? But how have you seen FinOps maturing? Maybe not necessarily FinOps itself maturing, but companies' attitudes and actions towards FinOps. In other words, let's not just minimize or shrink our spend, but let's spend wisely and get some value out of it. Are you seeing companies mature in that way, Werner?
This is one of the biggest struggles I see in terms of, once again, quantifying or trying to measure the success of a cloud investment, right? Because to your point, Jeff, people might see, and to what Martin was saying, people will see the cloud bill and they might just go ahead and compare it to what a particular previous workload was costing on-prem, right? But that's obviously a very myopic way to look at it. And what I try to encourage also customers to see is just how do you quantify in your business model the impact that cloud is having to other initiatives in the company, right? To, let's say, the cost of the agility. Right now, you're a lot quicker to release, but did you quantify that in your business model? Like, what does it cost to you, or what are the savings to you, or what is the efficiency improve your top line or your bottom line? Because now you can release, let's say, every day, as opposed to before when you were on-prem, it would be, every 2 weeks that you would do a release. So it would be every month that you would do a release. Or something else that is really hard to quantify that I always mention when people say like, oh, but the cloud and the cost savings of this is, it's the cost of curiosity, right? You have a lot of people on-prem, especially when we talk about a lot of the projects that we do at Pythian with data related, ML, machine learning, now with AI as well. If you try to do any of these projects on-prem, the cost of curiosity, just literally checking to see if it actually will be feasible, is very high in some cases, right? We had customers that tried to do, back in the day, the famous, when big data was the thing, before Gen AI became the thing, big data was the thing. And we had customers that attempted to do large Spark clusters on-prem because they thought they could get something out of it. And a lot of those projects failed after $2-3 million of being spent building massive big Spark clusters on-prem. And so the cost of curiosity was extremely high for those customers. And now the cost of curiosity can be extremely low on the other end, right? I can boot up Fabric if I want it today, or something like BigQuery, Snowflake, etc., try it out, and in a couple of weeks I would have my answer of whether what we thought would work works or it doesn't work. And there's got to be some way to quantify that as well inside all these ROI calculations to figure out what really we are getting in terms of economic benefits from the cloud. And this one in particular is one that I don't think really gets quantified often, and it's huge if you look at it.
Well, I think what happens is that these projects are started generally by IT, because IT really they're the folks who should choose where infrastructure runs, but these aren't really infrastructure conversations. They are business conversations. Mm-hmm. So the word we should be driving towards, I think, is value, meaning is it lowering a cost? Is it gaining revenue? Is it increasing customer sentiment, employee productivity? All sorts of things. And those should be defined by the business before large investments go in. Martin, anything you'd add to this?
Yeah, so I think talking about what's happened in the last year is a maturing of FinOps as a discipline to Warner's point. So previously, Gen 1 FinOps and A FinOps, we focused on rate optimization and workload optimization. Pay as little as you can for the workload and turn it off when you're not using it. And that is like your infrastructure utility bill. But it doesn't get to Warner's point about cost of curiosity or the revenue or value generated from those workloads. So in the last year, I've seen within the FinOps Foundation much more focus, not so much on paying as little as possible, but on showback, on attribution, being able to link the cost of some cloud infrastructure to the value it generated, attaching it to a work stream or attaching it to a Jira ticket or attaching it to a project. So you can look over the course of that project. Yeah, we may have spent more than we wanted to on this because it was quick and we want to spin it up dirty, but look at the value we got out of it. So attribution rather than optimization, much more over the last year.
Let's pivot for a second. Let's go to everybody's favorite topic, artificial intelligence. Do you feel like companies are getting some value out of this yet? Martin, we'll stick with you. If so, what examples are you seeing in your personal experience with companies?
So I do feel like we're starting to see some companies successfully realizing value out of it. And it's interesting, the ones that are getting to a value endpoint rather than the ones who are burning through a pile of money to no end. And I think it's about focus on a small number of problems to work at them with. Everybody familiar with the I think is John Prober, the shoe guy from LA in the 1950s. 2 not 3. Does that story ring a bell? When you're selling shoes to somebody and you've got 2 sets of shoes in front of them and they say, I'd like to see another pair, and you say, okay, which pair do you want to take back? You don't bring another pair out. It's much easier to make a decision when you've only got 2 pairs of things or 2 things to choose between 3. So where I've seen success with, people have a very well-defined small problem space and a very well-defined small set of solutions they can apply to that. Then there's a quick matrix. Does this work? Does this work? Does this work? It doesn't. We can either drop it or realize value out of it. So quite focused. We've got a couple of clients that I don't think we could talk about in specific. I'm going to leave you if you want to talk about that, Jeff. But the one that I specifically refer to is just, it was the most pedestrian, most quotidian thing. 0 shot or few shot classifications. There are a small number of models that are great for it. There's a small set of problems, and it gets humans out of low value repetitive work into high value work. So that's where I'm seeing success. I'm also seeing a lot of people burn through a lot of money without much to show for it in the end. And that's usually when they're trying to try 15 different approaches to 15 different problems, throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks.
Well, and that builds on what your previous point was, and that was start with something very well defined, very small, very fit for purpose on what you're trying to accomplish. Is this the right tool? Yes, then let's apply it to the thing. You know, I started a big part of my tech career in the Microsoft space in the SharePoint world, and we remember that explosion starting in the late 2000s and then into the teens before it was adopted into 365. And the blessing and the curse of it is it could do anything, which meant it ultimately did nothing because it was hard to define. I used to say that it was like the world's greatest box of Legos because you could put them together, general business people, in a way that would make a difference in their day. But they'd have to define what that looked like first. And that was always a big challenge. Warner, how about you? AI in the real world making a difference in 2024. Have you seen some examples of it?
So just before I jump into the actual answer, Jeff, I just want to make a small comment that because you can actually have Excel on top of SharePoint, it is the ultimate rogue IT stack. There's nothing you cannot develop on your own
There's
if you can
do.
put it on an Excel worksheet and then host it on your SharePoint. You can do a full SaaS that way.
I made an amazing career out of doing just that for a number of years and teaching other people how to get into trouble.
Is a whole rogue IT stack. Yeah. Anyway, so I would say we have to separate a couple of things. One is just the AI that has been baked into the consumer products that we work with every day, right? Like the Google Workspace, solutions. We have Gemini. If you're working within the Microsoft stack, you have Copilot, and that I feel like it is definitely getting adopted, and most knowledge workers are starting to see an immediate benefit in just, summarization, smart transcription of meetings, easily improved search, right? So you get more comprehensive search results, faster authoring of documents, and all that stuff. I think that stuff is going to be considered a given, right, in a couple of years. Also, the cost of inference is trending down, obviously. And so we will see a point where nobody will be even questioning, like, for example, in the Google Workspace, it won't be something like, oh, we're going to pick a few people that are going to be Gemini enabled because the cost of Gemini is actually material to our workspace bill. It's just going to continue trending down to zero until it will be like a thing. It's just included, right? It's like saying nobody would buy a productivity suite that doesn't have a word processor, right? It's going to be the exact same thing. It just comes with the thing. So that I think is incredibly successful, and most people that really learn how to dominate the tools will not go back to working in the previous way that they're working, myself included. And then the other thing is like the custom solutions, and right, where you actually have to roll your sleeves, and it becomes more of a real software project, which is the reality that most people have to face, is that AI is not just the wizard yet, that you can just tell it what you want and it'll go end to end and do it for you, right? The reality is that you still have to plan where the data is going to come from, what is the model that you're going to use, what are the prompting techniques that you're still going to use. I'm assuming that we're going to stick with the Gen AI universe. Yeah, right, you have to have the prompting techniques. Not only that, but you have to operationalize it too. So now you have to look into, I don't want to throw more buzzwords here, but the AI ops or LLM ops is a real thing. We've started to see Pythium. I think this year is really when we've seen the real production adoption of some of the Gen AI prototyping work that we've been doing in the last couple of years. And we've had to implement these tools because you can't go in blind. And then you start to have all these issues where, for example, easy one is the customer says, oh, we have this issue with a particular use case. Can we adjust the prompt to be better at it? And the answer is like, yeah, we definitely can. But how do we guarantee that we're not introducing other issues with the process? Like, how do we guarantee that when we modify the prompt, we're not breaking other parts of the solution, right? So there's a level there of regression testing that you have to do that is literally related to the outputs of the LLM. And you're not going to develop this from scratch. Now there's the hyperscalers are coming out with their own solutions. The open source community is just, well, it's just wildly aggressive, right? I don't know if you guys remember the leaked memo or message from Google internally that said we have no moat when they talked about, when Llama was leaked, right? And it's because the open source community is so aggressive. The startup community, basically the new template for every single startup is make a GitHub, get it to be the #1 open source adopted solution, and then figure out how you're going to monetize it after the fact.
Figure it out after the fact.
Yeah, you're going to sell either the enterprise support or you're going to sell like the cloud hosted version. But the most important thing is to be super aggressive on release and just get users to adopt it. Adoption, adoption, adoption. So all this just goes to help out in really making truly fleshed out LLM solutions, right? I think I cannot understate how much the open source community has really helped into turning all these, like pie in the sky kind of ideas into real production systems by continuously innovating on all these things like the LLM ops platforms, just the improvements, in terms of the testing, in terms of prompt management. A lot of these tools, the open source community releases even more aggressively than the hyperscalers themselves.
And thinking about, AI, obviously it doesn't run without having great data. And, thinking back to the intro, Warner, you've spent a fair amount of time in the data world on the infrastructure side. What things have you seen in 2024 because of the attention on AI and people wanting to be successful there? They're realizing they've got to get their data estates in order. What things are you seeing companies do to help make that happen?
Yeah, well, the biggest push it really is that companies now realize that a lot of the investments that they haven't done in data governance are becoming bottlenecks or complete roadblocks to being able to deploy AI solutions, right? So we have customers that have never implemented a data catalog. They don't have a proper data tagging strategy. They don't have data quality processes in place. So, people. And again, I'm not going to harp on salespeople, but a lot of the sales cycles, especially related to AI, all make it sound like, you have a database or you have some kind of cloud bucket or something, and you just tell the AI, here's your data, and boom, there's your use case. And that's just clearly, obviously not the case, right? If you never measured your data quality, you never took care of it, garbage in, garbage out works just the same when you feed it to an LLM. And so if you never did these investments, turns out that you won't be able to move as fast on your AI use case, right? You might have to go back, take care of some of the fundamentals and the basics first, and then you're in a good position to start feeding some of this data or some of these documents to the LLM. Because if you have a knowledge base and you have documents that some of them describe your organization as it was 10 years ago, but procedures have been replaced, but you're still feeding all that information to the LLM is not going to know. It's going to read your procedure from 10 years ago and be just as confused as your new employee is today. So a lot of this goes back to taking care of the fundamentals that they're not new things. We've been harping on them for a long time, but still you see all the time that they're just not implemented out in the field.
Yeah, I use the example as if for years you're not going to take care of your car, and then all of a sudden you want to drive across country. You just can't do it. You just can't do it. Martin, let's put on our technology crystal balls here and start to think about 2025. And we'll go back to our topic of cloud computing. What do you see cloud providers focusing on in 2025? How can businesses prepare for that? Whether it's merging cloud services, mergers, acquisitions, stuff. What's your gut tell you?
So I think we're actually starting to see a little bit of it already. And it goes back to one of the first topics we talked about today, which was cloud repatriation. So if you look at how much compute has been on-prem, it's basically been static for like the last 5 years, and it's predicted to continue to be static. People aren't really shutting down or moving wholesale out of it. The percentage share of cloud compute is going up as the hyperscalers build out, but the absolute share of on-prem is staying the same because there's a lot of stickiness to those on-prem workloads. And people have been trying different approaches to get rid of that stickiness. I'm going to steal a quote from Corey Quinn about VMware when Broadcom bought VMware and burned it down for the insurance money. And that's prompted a lot of conversation last year about getting out of data centers and off VMware and into the cloud. But it hasn't actually really resulted in a huge shift. What I've seen in a hyperscaler response to that is better and more hybridization enablement technologies. So if we look back at the last couple of releases on reInvent, we've got EKS hybrid nodes, which are direct competitors with Anthos. So you can extend your Kubernetes control plane into your data center. So I can have my backend be next to my legacy database without having to worry about moving it. Things like Private Link for now allows you to have just a VPC endpoint that I can access my on-prem resources as if they're in the cloud. So blurring that border between cloud and on-prem and enabling people to take advantage of that low cost of experimentation, that low cost of discovery in the cloud without having to wholesale abandon their on-prem workloads or without having to do the very large and troubling amount of work that sometimes is necessary. I think we recently had a situation where we had an on-prem workload that had been running there 20 years and had 40 million lines of stored procedures. If you can just add your cloud Kubernetes to that database without doing a transform, it's a very attractive story to a lot of clients. But I've seen AWS especially take two thrusts: hybridization and direct competition with GCP. By basically, GCP has been the better developer experience for years, and AWS has gone, well, we're losing on the AI side. Sorry to all the AWS fans, but it's true. So they're going to compete with them on the developer experience side. Yeah, capturing market share by making it easy to leverage legacy resources, by solving problems should have been solved a long time ago in terms of hybridization. I imagine we'll see Google going a lot more into that. There'll be some price competition now that Anthos has a real competitor. So price points will come down and better and smoother technology integration for legacy workloads.
Really interesting point that you make, because through all the years we've been doing this stuff, we see people moving out to the public cloud, and then you hear the phrase multi-cloud, and that meaning more than one cloud that the company is using, public cloud that is. And then I always get asked by customers, 1,000 times I've been asked, does that mean one application running in cloud A and another one in cloud B, or does it mean application A running across two different clouds? And it has always meant having bespoke applications running in a bespoke cloud and never spanning clouds. Never, ever. Egress fees alone are a disaster for that. But I think that this, Warner, what do you think about this new hybrid environment, thinking the public cloud connected to your private cloud in your data center, your managed host, or wherever that might be, to really merge the experience of these applications to the legacy data, legacy applications, and the new ones?
I think that's the most realistic thing that all the hyperscalers can do. Unless you're dealing with a startup that decided to be cloud native from day one, there's going to be a massive amount of on-prem state that is not going to be lifted or shifted, and it's also not going to be refactored to actually be cloud native anytime soon, if ever. Once you break down the costs of just the software refactoring, the costs of the actual outages in some cases when they are like truly mission critical, revenue driving systems, just to say like, oh, we're going to take it down for one day because we need to do X, Y, or Z, it's just a non-starter. Then you look at the cost of, refactoring applications and so on. So anyway, the easiest thing for hyperscalers is to just accept this as a reality and to produce the better tools to be able to merge both of these. Like Martin was saying, right? They're doing big improvements in terms of the Kubernetes stories, in terms of the hybrid connectivity stories. Also, something else that is an interesting trend from started last year, continues on this year, is where we have different cloud providers providing services into their competitors, right? So we have like Google BigQuery Omni. We have another good example is that you can have RDS in another cloud, right? AWS sells this. Microsoft has Azure Arc. They have Arc for databases, Arc for Kubernetes, Arc for monitoring. Same thing. It's like you're putting in like your spy agent right over in another cloud provider. So this is another strategy that most likely will also continue. So not just with the merging of on-prem, but also telling the customer, look, if you do deploy into Azure, or if you do deploy into AWS, or you do deploy into Google, and you're currently my customer somewhere else, you'll still have all these goodies and tools that you can have deployed over there that will continue to drive some kind of consumption back into the hyperscaler, right? So this is another trend that, again, has gotten quite a bit of a foothold. The other example I want to bring up is Oracle, obviously, with the whole Oracle database at Google that was announced this year.
I think it's the best example of this whole multi-cloud world. Yeah, with the fact that you can now license it to run it across natively in all of the clouds.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good strategy from Larry. There's a reason why he has the 10 yachts. Yeah.
Exactly. He gets an island for that one, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Warner, with the focus on AI, with the focus on also, now that everybody's going back and looking at their data and the growth and the pace of the growth of data, how do you think companies are going to address data security and privacy in 2025? With more of that being put in the cloud, with more of a focus on it, with it being cleaned up and prettier, which means it's also a honeypot for the bad guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most customers are already, I find that they're more security conscious than they are data conscious, to be honest. So you'll find all kinds of things related to data quality or lack of data governance or whatnot. But when you talk to the InfoSec people, most of them are very, very capable people. They have, good stories. The weakest link every single time, the weakest link is not some kind of sophisticated hack, right? Most people are just phished or socially engineered
It's a human.
into hurting, into hurting their own organization. Yeah, absolutely. And so I find that this is very, very strong. It's just going to get stronger now with AI tools, right? We're going to have AI enabled security, and in the same vein, we're going to have AI enabled data cataloging, data quality collecting, and all this kind of stuff. So the story will probably get better. The biggest issue, like I said, is just really the human factor. And at the end of the day, to be honest, as we continue to automate a lot of human tasks with AI, and AI agents is going to be another thing. It's the current buzzword for the last quarter of 2024 is AI agents. More work will be done through automated systems, then most likely we'll be actually seeing some trend down in some of these security incidents.
Interesting. Well, Martin, as we start to wrap this up a little bit, what breakthroughs do you think we can expect, maybe in either in analytics or for data visualization or just generally in the cloud market? What do you think we can get excited about?
So if I was silly and were to bet money on it, I would bet money on something, again, that Warner highlighted. So rather than large language models, the increasing utility and spread of specific small language models, democratized access via Hugging Face, Olama, which I run on every laptop that I've got has a copy of that on it. And people are getting better at tuning and trimming and optimizing their small language models for a task. And the nice thing about those is the costs are very predictable because you're running it on standard compute. You're not consuming an API, and you're not subject to people who have spent a lot of money in trying to come up with a working billing model. So that's where I see it. I see us spending more time in SLMs and LLMs. I run an SLM myself as my own coding assistant rather than an LLM. I can see a lot of places where those things, and the other nice advantage of SLMs is they tend not to have a natural language interface, because a natural language interface to a tool tends to trick you into thinking the tool can do more than it actually can. So having it be a programmatic tool rather than an NLP tool, I think works to SLM's advantage. So I think 2025, the news story is all going to be about LLMs, the actual implementation, the heavy lifting is going to be done more by SLMs.
Totally agree. And I think that that's going to also drive more of this hybrid architecture stuff, because we're going to be able to take this stuff that we generate in the cloud or these larger cloud solutions and get the fit for purpose bits closer to where they need to actually run.
I can run that in my legacy data center quite happily.
Yeah, or in your living room, wherever it might be.
On my desk right now while we're on this call.
That's right. Warner, what are the big bets for 2025 for you?
Well, the only thing that's for sure is that the LLM race will continue and the leapfrogging will continue, because it's just this year has been insane. How OpenAI comes out with something, and then Google comes out with something the next day, and then the next day Anthropic comes out with something, and it's just so insanely aggressive. Right now we're recording close to Christmas. OpenAI has been doing the 12 days of OpenAI thing where they release a new feature every day, and then just suddenly Google in the middle of the 12 days of OpenAI decides to drop, Gemini 2.0 Flash, their new video generation model, VO2. I don't know if you guys looked at VO2, by the way. I was looking at samples of VO2 over the last few days online, and it's just mind-blowing. And it just goes to show too, like, for example, an organization like Google can just afford to be cooking in the background for a while, and then suddenly, boom, they do a release, and now they have the best text to video, image to video model in the market, right? And so this is just not going to stop. And I don't know. I was talking to a colleague about this. I don't know if the speed actually gives people a chance to contemplate the consequences of this technology as well, right? As we blur the lines of reality and what's digital, and how easy it is to fake a video now to make something that looks like it actually happened, right? But the speed of the technology doesn't allow us as a society to stop and contemplate all these implications, right? It just has
and
to
it's
be
sort of
like
the first time that that's
it's
ever
going.
happened before. I mean, you can think about the major disruptions that have happened throughout history. You go from you get into the industrial age and how much of the corporate, the business world was upset through that, but it happened over years as opposed to moments.
Just look at the adoption of the internet. I still remember when my parents brought in like our first computer that had a 14400 modem.
Oh, yeah.
And then the experience obviously was so limited by bandwidth back then. It took a lot of time, right? Then the introduction of the concept of social media happened. Now we have, lots of bandwidth so that we can actually share images, video. All this took quite a bit of time, right? The speed at which we went from, LLMs only produce like disfigurements to like this looks just like me, and I could totally believe that was me. It has been basically a year and a half, right? So where are we going to be in another year and a half? This is the part that, my crystal ball says that it'll be, just as crazy aggressive. It'll be, even higher fidelity. But I don't know where we're going to be in terms of the social implications of the technology sometimes.
Martin, any closing words on that one as we start to wrap up here?
Oh, I think it's interesting to see governments struggling with that specific question, both in terms of regulating marking of output and regulating what can be used for training. I think we're at the situation where governments are expecting it to go at a pace that they can understand, match their legislative. It's simply not the case. They need to be dealing with this a lot faster, relying on. And this is the risk, because if they're relying on industry for expertise, then industry is going to have its own agenda. And so I think we're going to see a lot of friction in the regulatory environment, more on the EU side than in the US side. But that, I think, is going to be the larger source of drag on this rather than any technological drag. What I'll be interested in is see how close we can get to us having 3 video LLM produced talking heads doing this podcast for us next year.
Yes,
There
exactly.
you go.
Set ourselves as a challenge. Maybe my hairline will look better.
I was
if
actually...
I have hair grown back, it's an LLM.
Oh, that would be an easy one, Martin. That would be an easy one.
Yeah, we could probably pull that off now. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Maybe we get back together here in the next, we get into 2025 and we have a conversation around how society can deal with some of this stuff and how we think.
I'd like to look back in a year's time and see how well our predictions panned out. So if we do this again, let's have a part, like, how good are we at this? Should you listen to us? Were we right?
Yeah. I feel pretty confident in the words that we used. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of the program today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everybody.